building, some on homelessness, what it's really like to be homeless. And now today I've invited in my friend and colleague, Johnsie Adams, who lives and works in this region, has been through some of her training, gotten 1 degree, is working on another in human service. And I met Johnsie through an internship that she did with the local college with my agency. And it was a phenomenal experience. And I got to know your story, Johnsie, and I want others to hear it. I want others to share it. And you're at a point in your life where you're willing to do that. So tell me just a little bit about your upbringing. I think you were born in Shelby, that's right?
No, Charlotte.
In Charlotte, but you lived in Shelby.
Kings Mountain.
Kings Mountain. Okay, so we got that part. And how many were in your home when you were growing up?
3. I have 2 sisters and my mother.
Okay. And your father was kind of out of the picture?
Yes.
Or was out of the picture?
He was out of the picture.
And he passed away 20-some years ago, but it was not a pleasant thing. He passed away from what?
Heroin overdose.
So he overdosed, and you know, there he's out of your life, not only actually, but now forever.
Mm-hmm.
So you've dealt with that. You've dealt with that bereavement and that emptiness, and we may talk about that later. But tell us about your mom. I know you love her. She's your mom, but tell us about her.
Well, my mother she's college educated. She went to college. She used to work at the Charlotte Observer down in Charlotte. And we moved back to Kings Mountain, I think, when I was 4, because she was pregnant with my sister. So my grandfather had land, so he let us move on the land, and it was a house and everything. Then she got addicted to crack cocaine. So I remember times we wouldn't have any heat in the house, no power, and she got mad because my grandpa used to come by the house and visit all the time.
And this would be her father.
Yeah, her father. And she would be mad because she would want to do drugs, and he would just come by and check on us. So then she moved us into a housing development. So 3 country kids moved into a housing development, seeing stuff that we had never seen before.
So you moved out of the rural area into public housing?
Yes.
Not a subdivision, but public housing. What was that like?
It was a shock because we had never seen anything like that. We didn't see people drinking outside, drugs dealers selling drugs in the open air market like that.
Right.
It was just, and then like, since she was in the drugs, she would have drug dealers at our house all the time, cooking dope for them. You know, they were always around our house.
Yeah.
So we had men in and out of our house all the time, and she had 3 girls.
Did you have to, and this may be a delicate situation you don't want to answer, how did you defend yourself from the potential that all that brings with it, of having drug-abusing men in and out of your house with 3 beautiful young girls there?
We would just go outside because she suffered with depression, and she still does.
Yeah.
So if she couldn't do drugs, she would make us stay in the house.
Right.
And then like we wouldn't have any food. So we would just go outside, and when she was getting high or had people over the house, that's the only time we could go outside.
Yeah.
And then like we didn't have any food, we had to go to the neighbor's house and borrow food or call my grandpa, because my grandpa and grandma and grandfather were very religious, and they always took care of, spoiled us. So if we didn't have food, we would call my grandpa, and he would have to bring us food up there because she didn't care. She's like, I don't care what y'all gonna eat.
Because her goal was to get another fix.
Yes.
Do you know what took her down? What did she do at the Observer? Was she in the newsroom? What did she do?
I think she was a receptionist, an office worker.
Okay.
And I just want people to understand that drug addiction does not discriminate, because she does have a degree from college.
Right.
And she grew up in a very strict Christian household and ended up still doing drugs.
Now, you mentioned your grandparents, and there may be people who are thinking, well, why didn't the grandparents intervene? What was your thought about that?
A lot of older people do not understand drug addiction. So they didn't understand that it's a mental addiction. So they weren't ready. My grandma and grandpa were 60 and 70 years old when this happened. So they weren't ready to take in 3 children.
Right.
Because back then you just didn't take children from their parents.
Right.
So they would always come up there and try to take care of us. But I remember one night my mom had been gone for probably 3 to 4 days. And I was only like, before we moved into the projects, I was probably 8 years old. So she left me there with the 2 kids. One was 6 and the other one was 3.
So you're the oldest of 3.
Yes.
All right.
With no food in the house. And my grandpa, she's like, do not open this door if your grandpa come over here. He was beating on the door, and we wouldn't let him in. And we finally let him in because we were hungry. And my grandma got us and was going to take us to the police department and drop us off.
Wow.
Yes, because she was like, she didn't understand what was going on. She's like, I'm going to drop them out the police department. And my grandpa was like, no, you're not. So he just took us home with them. Then when she finally came back, they took us back home.
So, and you may not know this. I guess your grandparents passed away now?
Yes, both of them.
How old were you when they passed? Were you fully grown? Or
Fully grown. My grandma,
okay.
they passed away in their 90s.
So do you think, looking back on it, as a parent yourself now, do you think they saw it, the lens through which they saw the addiction was strictly a spiritual lens, in that if she'd just get right with God, everything would be right?
Yes.
What do you think about that, and what's your response to that today as we have people dealing with addiction, maybe in unprecedented numbers, and it's not people that you would expect, quotation marks, to be addicted? This is everybody's dealing with. I mean, every family has somebody that's dealt with an opioid problem, it seems lately. What would you say to people who say, well, this is purely a spiritual problem? How would you feel about that?
I don't think this is a spiritual problem. I think the spiritual aspect will help them stay on the right path, but drug addiction is a disease. Because I've seen people do stuff you couldn't even imagine for drugs. I've seen women sell their bodies, and people take from their children. And nobody would want to do that. No woman would want to sell her body just to get high off drugs if it wasn't something addictive.
Yeah, you wouldn't do that kind of thing unless something...
Under normal circumstances.
Okay. And you mentioned that situation of people doing anything, being anything. How much were you neglected because of drugs?
Well, I was neglected a lot because we were neglected a lot because she would always be out smoking drugs or gone, or she would have people come into the house smoking drugs, and it was just like we ran around a lot of the times and did what we wanted to do because she wasn't doing what she was supposed to do.
So did you and your sisters, when you were in school, it sounds like you're pretty close in age, when you were in school, were you constantly in trouble because you were unsupervised at home, or did you know that was a safe place and you went there and engaged? What was going on there at school?
School life was great. I never got in trouble in school. I mean, I got in a fight over, but we knew we would get disciplined. She was very strict, so we would get harshly disciplined. So I loved going to school because you were going to get to eat at school.
Right.
And it was just better than being at home.
How was your attendance in school?
Good attendance.
You had good attendance all the way through.
Yes.
And I bring that up because...
Except the 10th, 11th grade, because I got pregnant with my daughter, my oldest daughter. And I had the pregnancy wasn't good, so I missed 3 months of school. But I ended up, my 12th grade year, I took double class and still graduated on time.
So you missed months with your pregnancy, had a child, went back to school, and graduated on time. Mm-hmm. That's phenomenal. I mean, based on the age you are, I don't know, were there many support systems in place at the school? Did they have special systems and programs for mothers?
Back then they didn't, because like now if you're pregnant in school, you can get homeschooled. They send an instructor to the house. But back then it was just right after I had my daughter, I didn't have anyone to watch her because my my boyfriend at the time, he went to prison for 8 months. So I had her by myself. I had to go to school. Once I had to go to school. I got off school, went to work. I worked at a daycare.
Okay.
And then I still had to pay for her daycare. Because, social service would give you vouchers, but I still had to pay a certain amount of money.
So you got a discount maybe because you worked there or not?
No. It was just because social service paid.
So you had a voucher.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember how long it took you to get a voucher when you were first a parent? Do you have any recollection of that?
It probably only took me 2 or 3 weeks to get a voucher, but now Cleveland County hasn't given vouchers out for daycare in over 10 years.
Yeah. the program is so overloaded. So that brings that it's hard to get vouchers, and that's different county to county, but there is a wait. And one of the challenges we see, I don't know if it was when you first went into that program, you can't get the voucher until you get the job.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you care for your child while you search for a job? And I would say to that, we have some tools for that at the Resource Connection Gateway, if you're interested, that you can do some of that before you get the voucher. It's not perfect, but it's a system we've put in place. So you can go to the Gateway, resourceconnectiongateway.com, and find out more about that if you're interested. But for people that are listening, one of the things, what do you say to people who say, well, you know, the system was there, this family just didn't have a parent who would make it happen for them, and these things wouldn't happen if the mom had been engaged. What would you say to that? Because we hear a lot of that.
Well, the thing is, like, you have to, like I tell people, don't ever judge something that you never been through. Because, like, it was really hard for us. She never wants to get off drugs. To this day, she says she's never going to get off drugs.
So she has no desire
she doesn't.
to leave that world.
No.
Is she housed now, or is she homeless?
She's staying with my sister now because she was staying in a halfway house, and that didn't work out. The woman wasn't paying the rent, so everybody got evicted. So she moved back in with my sister, and now she just got approved for an apartment, so she's going to move into her own apartment again.
Okay. So all these years she struggled with drugs. It's really a miracle she's alive if she's used crack that long.
She's pretty healthy. That's what's amazing.
That's amazing. You must have good genes, is all I can say.
She is probably about 300 pounds.
Wow. Unable to work, I guess, because of her addiction?
No, she has disability.
Okay. So, and this isn't about your mom. We're not trying to hurt her. That's not the goal. It's just try to get a context. And you talked about that earlier, about how, well, off air, how your Christmas presents would get sold to support a drug habit and all that. Now you're heading into adulthood. You got there quickly because you had a baby at 16.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? What was it like transitioning from being a child to having a child?
Well, I had always been there for my sisters now. You know, I took care of my sisters. So when I got pregnant, it really didn't bother me. It was just because I moved in with my grandma and grandpa, and I was spoiled. They wouldn't even let me cook. I couldn't stand up. I couldn't do anything.
They were old school.
Yes, and they brought me my food every morning. Then I ended up moving back in with my mother into this 2-bedroom trailer in this crack-riddled neighborhood, and it was horrible. So she stole from me. Like, I had my daughter a penny bank that I was saying. I went to school one day. She stole all my money out of my penny bank.
Okay.
And then we moved. I can't remember when we moved from there. But it was just really horrible moving back in with her. But when I graduated, I was pregnant with my second child. So I had one kid, and I was pregnant with my second child at my graduation.
All right, hard question. And I hear it, and it angers me because I don't know how to answer it. I can hear people listen to this story and say, well, Johnsie, I can tell where this story's headed. You've had challenges, and you have, and you're going to share those in our next edition. But I hear it, and I know it'll probably happen. They say, well, Johnsie, if you hadn't gotten pregnant, life would have been a lot easier. What do you say to that?
Well, my thing is, my life was not, my children had nothing to really do with it because I've always worked.
Right.
I'm going to work. I started working when I was 14 years old at the JTPA program. And I got my first apartment when I was 18. I had already got my first apartment and moved out, and I was working then. And most of my challenges came in from my husband because once we got married, it was really bad.
So let's set the context for that, and then we're going to come back to the second half of this. Here's a person, Johnsie, what I'm hearing you say, you grew up in a crack-infested home, lost your father to a heroin overdose when you were 22, pregnant at 16, still graduated high school on time, but pregnant when you walked across the stage to get your diploma with your second child. And you just told me, if I heard you right, that the real problems didn't start until you got married.
Yeah, until me and my husband, We were living together, then we eventually got married.
Right. So you that's where things got tough.
Yes.
So we're going to break. We're going to come back and reset. But I'm having a hard time getting my head around how it can be tougher than what you've already been. But I know a little bit of the story, so I understand where you're headed. And I think the listeners are going to want to know that too. So let's break here. This is the Resource Connection Gateway podcast. You can find it on our website at resourceconnectiongateway.com.
This podcast brought to you by Resource Connection Gateway. You can find more information at resourceconnectiongateway.com. This has been part 1 of the Johnsie Adams story. And this has been a production of resourceconnectiongateway.com. Let the Resource Connection Gateway help.